Dr. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his brow as he guided his Robinson R-44 helicopter onto the newly constructed helipad behind his Mediterranean-style mansion in Oakwood Heights. The late summer sun cast long shadows across his meticulously landscaped yard, which had taken 3 months and a small fortune to perfect. As an emergency veterinarian specializing in large animals, the helipad wasn't just a luxury. It was a necessity for reaching critical cases across the county's sprawling ranches and farms. The rotor wash had barely settled when he noticed Patricia Wellington power walking toward his property, her perfectly coiffed silver hair remarkably unmoved by the wind. Behind her, 2 other HOA board members clutched tablets and notebooks, their faces set in expressions of practiced concern. Marcus had met Patricia during his property closing 3 months ago, where she'd spent 45 minutes detailing the community's prestigious heritage and exacting standards. "Dr. Chen," Patricia called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced pleasantness that set Marcus's teeth on edge. "We weren't aware you'd be operating an aircraft from your residential property." She gestured to her tablet, pulling up what appeared to be the HOA's bylaws. Section 7.3 clearly states that all external modifications require board approval, and I don't recall any application for a helipad. Marcus maintained his professional smile, developed over years of dealing with anxious pet owners. "Actually, Mrs. Wellington, I submitted comprehensive plans during the purchase process. They were approved by both the city and the HOA Architectural Committee." He reached into his flight jacket and produced a folder containing all relevant paperwork, including FAA clearances and safety certifications. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she scanned the documents. The other board members, Tom Fitzgerald and Sarah Chen, no relation, peered over her shoulders. Sarah, at least, had the grace to look embarrassed about the confrontation. "Well," Patricia sniffed, handing back the folder with barely concealed disdain, "we'll need to review these in detail. The noise impact on our community wasn't properly considered. Several neighbors have already expressed concerns." Marcus gestured to the surrounding properties, the nearest of which was a good quarter-mile away. "I've actually had several neighbors express interest in the service, especially given the large animal population in the surrounding areas. Just last week, I helped save Mrs. Rodriguez's prize stallion thanks to quick helicopter access." Patricia's lips thinned to nearly invisible lines. "Nevertheless, we'll need to conduct a full review. In the meantime, please refrain from any unusual activities." She turned on her heel, her fellow board members trailing in her wake like reluctant ducklings. Marcus watched them leave, a knot forming in his stomach. He'd dealt with difficult HOA boards before, but something in Patricia's tone suggested this was just the beginning. Looking at his helicopter, gleaming in the evening light, he couldn't help but wonder if he should have chosen a different community. Still, he'd invested too much to back down now. If Patricia Wellington wanted a fight, she'd learned that this veterinarian had dealt with far more ornery creatures than her. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's mailbox became a repository for an increasingly aggressive series of HOA notices. The first few were relatively benign: concerns about noise levels during takeoff and landing, suggestions for more appropriate times of operation, and requests for additional documentation. But as September rolled into October, the tone shifted dramatically. One particularly memorable morning, he returned from an emergency call to find Patricia and her architectural committee conducting what they called a routine inspection of his helipad. They scattered like startled pigeons when he landed, but not before he spotted them taking photographs and measurements with suspicious thoroughness. The next day's notice cited 17 alleged violations, ranging from non-standard vehicle storage to inappropriate landscaping integration. The latter particularly amused Marcus, considering he'd hired the same landscaper who maintained the HOA president's award-winning garden. During his weekly supply run to Carter's Farm Supply, Marcus overheard conversations that made his blood boil. Patricia had been going door to door, spreading concerns about property values plummeting due to the airport noise in their exclusive community. She even started a petition to have his helipad classified as a commercial operation, despite its strictly emergency and personal use status. "You wouldn't believe what she's saying," his neighbor, Ellen Rodriguez, told him while he examined her recovered stallion. "According to Patricia, you're running some kind of illegal charter service. I tried telling her about how you saved thunder here, but she just kept talking about her precious property values." Marcus documented everything meticulously, keeping copies of every notice, email, and witness statement. His lawyer, James Wong, reviewed the materials with growing concern. "They're building a case," James warned during their weekly call. "It's not a strong one, but with HOAs, it's often about who can sustain a longer fight." The situation reached a new level of absurdity when Patricia proposed an amendment to the HOA bylaws specifically prohibiting aerial vehicles from being stored or operated within community boundaries. The proposal carefully excluded drone delivery services to certain board members' homes, of course. Marcus attended every HOA meeting, presenting logical arguments and community support for his emergency veterinary service. He even offered to provide free emergency transport for any resident facing a medical crisis. But Patricia's influence ran deep, and each meeting ended with more restrictions and requirements piled onto his operation. The final straw came in the form of a certified letter threatening legal action if he didn't cease all helicopter operations within 30 days. Attached was a bill for $5,000 in administrative fees related to their investigations of his violations. That night, as Marcus sat in his home office reviewing the latest round of harassment, he noticed Patricia on her evening walk, phone raised to record yet another of his helicopter's routine maintenance checks. Something inside him snapped. If they wanted a fight, he'd give them one they'd never forget. The crisp November morning started like any other. Marcus had received an urgent call at 4 a.m. about a pregnant mare in distress at a farm 20 miles away. The case had been complicated but successful, resulting in the safe delivery of healthy twin foals. Exhausted but satisfied, he guided his helicopter back toward Oakwood Heights just as the sun began painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. What he saw as he approached his property made his heart stop. His helipad was empty. The Robinson R44, his lifeline to emergency cases and a $400,000 investment, had vanished. In its place was a laminated notice staked to the ground. Landing in his backup emergency landing zone, thankfully just a clear patch of his expansive lawn, Marcus sprinted to read the notice. The document bearing Patricia Wellington's flowing signature informed him that his non-approved vehicle had been removed for safety concerns and was being held at Valley Municipal Airport, some 30 miles away. Trembling with rage, Marcus immediately called James Wong. His lawyer's response was explosive. "They what? That's not just HOA overreach. That's grand theft. They had no authority to move an FAA-registered aircraft." The situation grew even more outrageous when Marcus arrived at Valley Municipal Airport. The specialized aircraft removal company demanded a $15,000 fee for the emergency relocation and storage, claiming they had proper authorization from the property managers, the HOA board. While Marcus argued with the storage facility manager, his phone buzzed with a text from Ellen Rodriguez. Attached was a video from that morning's emergency HOA board meeting, where Patricia proudly announced their decisive action to protect community standards. The board had apparently convened at 3 a.m. specifically to wait for Marcus to leave for his emergency call. "We finally addressed the elephant, or should I say helicopter, in the room." Patricia's voice rang out in the recording, met with nervous titters from her supporters. Dr. Chen will learn that in Oakwood Heights, rules are rules. The storage facility manager, a former Air Force mechanic named Mike, watched the video over Marcus's shoulder and let out a low whistle. "Man, that's cold. They waited until you were out saving animals to pull this stunt." Marcus paid the fee. He had no choice with lives depending on his ability to reach emergency cases. But as he flew his helicopter back home, a plan began forming in his mind. Patricia Wellington had just made a serious mistake. She transformed this from a simple neighborhood dispute into a personal vendetta. That evening, while reviewing his security cameras footage of the towing operation, Marcus received an interesting call from his friend Robert John, owner of Fresh Fields Organic Farm just outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Robert had been having issues with Patricia's attempts to force his farm to close due to agricultural odors affecting the community. "You know," Robert said casually, "we've got quite a surplus of organic fertilizer this season. Shame to let it go to waste." Marcus looked out his window at the community clubhouse, where the HOA held their monthly meetings in the outdoor pavilion. A slow smile spread across his face as he pulled up the local weather forecast and aerial maps. Marcus approached his revenge with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made him a successful veterinarian. Every element had to be perfect, legal, and most importantly, impossible to definitively trace back to him. He spent weeks gathering intelligence and preparing his masterpiece of malicious compliance. First came the legal groundwork. James Wan helped him file official complaints about the illegal helicopter removal, ensuring everything was documented. These complaints served two purposes. They established a paper trail of HOA harassment, and they kept Patricia's attention focused on legal proceedings rather than Marcus's other activities. Robert's farm proved to be an essential component. They worked together to create what Robert dubbed Special Blend XC, a particularly pungent but completely organic fertilizer mixture that would break down quickly in the air. They tested different formulations, eventually finding one that would disperse effectively without causing any environmental concerns. "It's completely legal," Robert assured him, packaging their creation in specially designed containers. "Just highly concentrated organic material. Totally safe, but the smell, well, let's say it'll make a statement." Marcus spent hours studying weather patterns and wind directions, determining the optimal flight path that would take him legally over the community pavilion. He also researched FAA regulations regarding aerial agricultural operations, ensuring every aspect of his plan fell within permitted guidelines. The timing had to be perfect. Through Ellen Rodriguez, who had become his eyes and ears in the community, Marcus learned that the HOA's annual budget meeting was scheduled for December 15th. Patricia had placed discussion of his aircraft situation last on the agenda, planning to propose even stricter regulations and substantial fines. "She's really running with this power trip," Ellen reported during one of Thunder's checkups. Yesterday, she actually suggested installing anti-aircraft lights around the community perimeter. "I think she was serious." Marcus also cultivated relationships with other disgruntled residents who had faced Patricia's wrath. There was the Johnson family, forced to remove their children's treehouse despite having proper permits. Mrs. Chen, still no relation, whose award-winning rose garden was deemed inconsistent with community aesthetics. And Mr. Peterson, who'd been fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway. Each piece of the puzzle fell into place. Marcus scheduled several legitimate veterinary appointments near Robert's farm for the day of the meeting, establishing a clear business reason for flying in that area. He installed new recording equipment in his helicopter to document everything, protecting himself from potential accusations. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. While conducting his normal business, he would legally fly over the community pavilion just as the wind carried his friend's organic fertilizer from its agricultural source. If some of that fertilizer happened to disperse over the meeting, well, that would just be an unfortunate coincidence. As the date approached, Marcus maintained his professional demeanor, attending HOA meetings and responding politely to increasingly hostile notices. But behind his calm exterior, anticipation built. Patricia Wellington was about to learn a valuable lesson about the consequences of abusing power. The morning of December 15th dawned clear and cold, with perfect visibility and a steady northwest wind. Exactly the conditions Marcus had been hoping for. He arrived at his first appointment at 7 a.m., treating a lame sheep at a farm 5 miles from Oakwood Heights. Each subsequent appointment brought him closer to Robert's farm, creating a logical flight pattern that would culminate in his masterpiece. Meanwhile, the HOA annual budget meeting was being set up in the community pavilion. Patricia had insisted on the outdoor venue despite the winter chill, claiming the helicopter issue required more space for concerned residents. Space heaters hummed as board members arranged chairs and tested the microphone system. Ellen texted Marcus regular updates, pavilions filling up. Patricia's wearing her power suit and that horrible brooch shaped like a gavel. She keeps looking at the sky nervously. I think she's afraid you'll try something. She wasn't wrong, but Patricia was preparing for the wrong kind of confrontation. She'd stationed observers around the community with cameras, ready to document any violation of the HOA's new anti-aircraft regulations. She even hired a lawyer specializing in aviation law to attend the meeting. Robert called at noon, confirming everything was ready at his end. Special Blend X is packed and ready to go. Man, this batch is potent. You might want to fly with your vents closed. Marcus completed his afternoon appointments with methodical precision, each one documented and logged. At 3:30 p.m., he landed at Robert's farm for what appeared to be a routine check of some cattle. The Special Blend X was loaded into his helicopter's agricultural dispersal system, a modification that was, of course, fully licensed and documented for legitimate veterinary purposes. His timing needed to be perfect. The budget meeting would start at 4 p.m., with the helicopter discussion scheduled for 4:45. The wind was holding steady at 12 knots from the northwest, exactly as forecast. Everything was aligned for what Marcus had started thinking of as Operation Fertilizer Freedom. As he completed his pre-flight checks, Marcus received one final text from Ellen. Patricia just started her opening speech. She's really laying it on thick about preserving our community standards and dealing with disruptive elements. You should hear how she says helicopter, like it's a curse word. Marcus smiled as he started his engine. It was time to give Patricia Wellington a meeting she'd never forget. At precisely 4:43 p.m., Marcus's Robinson R-44 appeared in the sky above Oakwood Heights, maintaining a perfectly legal altitude and following his documented flight plan. Patricia's observers immediately began filming, just as he expected. Their footage would later prove valuable in demonstrating his complete compliance with all aviation regulations. The helicopter's approach coincided with Patricia's triumphant moment at the podium. And now, she announced, her voice carrying across the pavilion, we come to the most pressing issue facing our community, the unauthorized aircraft operations that have made our peaceful neighborhood into a war zone. Marcus timed his pass perfectly, engaging the dispersal system just as he crossed Robert's property line. The Special Blend X, warmed to optimal temperature for dispersal, emerged as a fine mist that caught the late afternoon sunlight like golden dust. The steady northwest wind did exactly what their calculations had predicted. Through his high-resolution camera, Marcus watched the scene unfold below. The first hints of their organic surprise reached the pavilion just as Patricia raised her gavel, preparing to call for a vote on the new anti-helicopter regulations. The reaction was immediate and magnificent. The gathered residents' expressions transformed from bored attention to confused concern to horrified realization. Patricia, still focused on her moment of triumph, didn't immediately notice the growing disturbance. All those in favor of implementing immediate fines for unauthorized aerial activity. She stopped mid-sentence as the full force of Special Blend X reached the pavilion. The scene dissolved into chaos. Board members abandoned their dignity, fleeing from the pavilion with hands covering their faces. Patricia's carefully arranged papers scattered in the wind as she finally recognized what was happening. Her outraged scream was clearly visible on Marcus's camera, though blessedly inaudible at his altitude. Only Ellen Rodriguez remained seated, calmly filming everything on her phone while wearing what appeared to be a professional-grade respirator. She'd later claimed she'd worn it due to seasonal allergies, though her wink at Marcus the next day suggested otherwise. The entire operation took less than 2 minutes. Marcus continued on his documented flight path, landing at his next scheduled appointment 10 miles away. Every second was recorded, every movement tracked and logged. He had maintained perfect compliance with all FAA regulations and HOA rules. After all, he hadn't flown directly over HOA property, and the wind patterns affecting Robert's agricultural activities were hardly his responsibility. As he shut down his helicopter at his final appointment, his phone exploded with messages and videos from witnesses. The annual budget meeting had been officially adjourned due to environmental concerns, and Patricia Wellington had been seen storming home, her power suit accessorized with an interesting new fragrance. The following days brought exactly the kind of chaos Marcus had anticipated. Social media exploded with videos of the incident, dubbed the Great HOA Fertilizer Fiasco by local news outlets. While Patricia Wellington attempted to rally support for legal action, her efforts faced an unexpected obstacle. Not a single piece of evidence suggested any wrongdoing on Marcus's part. The FAA investigation, which Patricia had demanded, only served to vindicate him. Flight logs showed his helicopter maintaining proper altitude and following approved flight paths. The dispersal system had only been activated over Robert's agricultural property, and weather records confirmed the wind direction. Even Patricia's own observer's footage worked against her, clearly showing Marcus operating within all regulatory boundaries. Robert's farm faced a brief investigation as well, but everything was in order. The organic fertilizer was properly documented, and its application, while unfortunately timed, was completely legal. "Can't control the wind," Robert said with a straight face to investigators. "That's farming for you." Community opinion shifted dramatically. Residents who had remained silent under Patricia's regime began speaking out. Stories of HOA overreach surfaced. Arbitrary fines, selective enforcement of rules, and personal vendettas carried out through bureaucratic manipulation. The helicopter towing incident, now seen as a gross abuse of power, became a rallying point for change. The January HOA meeting drew record attendance, but in a dramatic twist, it wasn't held in the still-airing pavilion. Instead, residents packed the indoor community center, many wearing knowing smiles and several sporting novelty nose clips as a form of silent protest. Patricia's opening speech was interrupted by Mr. Peterson, who called for an immediate board election citing recent events demonstrating leadership failures. The motion passed overwhelmingly. Patricia, reading the room, attempted to maintain dignity as she resigned on the spot, though her exit was somewhat undermined by someone playing Flight of the Valkyries on their phone as she left. The newly elected board, led by Ellen Rodriguez, worked quickly to reform the HOA's governance. They established clear guidelines for board authority, created an appeals process for citations, and specifically amended bylaws to protect legitimate business operations, including Marcus's emergency veterinary service. Marcus himself was appointed to the architectural committee, where his professional expertise proved valuable in balancing community standards with practical needs. His helipad was officially recognized as an emergency service asset, and he worked with residents to establish reasonable operating hours and noise reduction procedures. The story could have ended there, but fate had one final twist. 6 months later, Patricia Wellington's prize-winning Persian cat escaped and became stranded on the roof of her 3-story home. After the fire department deemed it too risky for a ladder rescue, guess who received the emergency call? Marcus arrived by helicopter, executed a perfect hover maneuver, and safely retrieved the terrified feline. As he handed the cat back to a speechless Patricia, he simply said, "No charge. That's what neighbors are for." Today, Oakwood Heights is held up as an example of how HOAs can work effectively when governed with reason and respect. The community newsletter even added a regular column titled "Up in the Air with Dr. Chin," featuring stories about his emergency veterinary flights. And while some say the pavilion still carries a faint organic aroma on warm days, most residents agree it's a small price to pay for the valuable lessons learned about power, justice, and the importance of community over control. As for Patricia, she eventually moved to a helicopter-free community in another state. However, her parting gift to Marcus, delivered through her realtor, was unexpected: a miniature bronze helicopter for his desk with a note reading, "Touché, Dr. Chen. Well played." The incident became a local legend, shared at community gatherings and retold to new residents during welcome meetings. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most effective response to unreasonable authority isn't direct confrontation, but rather a carefully planned, perfectly legal demonstration of the absurdity of power misused. And somewhere, high above Oakwood Heights, a veterinarian's helicopter still flies proud and free, a symbol of victory for common sense over bureaucratic overreach.